brothers WISP. The brothers WISP, brothers WISP. The brothers WISP. The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the brothers WISP. Let's take a ride through space on this mothership.
Quick aside before we start the cast. The Brothers WISP was brought to you by Sonar, a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP billing and operational support system. Learn more at Sonar.Software. We're also brought to you by TowerCoverage.com. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network. Real-time data metrics enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. Hey everybody, this is Tommy with the Brothers WISP. This is episode 163, and today we're going to be having a special topic with a new sponsor, Preseem. With me for today over here is Greg. Let's see here. No, I don't know where he's going to be because I goofed up OBS.
You can point any which way and I will respond. Good morning from Down Under.
Yeah, Greg. And you're what portion of Down Under are you?
I am in Melbourne, Australia. So in the southern eastern states.
Wonderful. All right.
And
cool.
we're currently struggling with power. So if my power goes, we'll blame the government.
Okay. All right. Well, that's why we invented this thing called the battery backup. Highly recommended for all of your towers. And then over here we have John Osman from the great state of Albuquerque in New Mexico.
What a wonderful state we are, Albuquerque. We're in New Mexico where everything's on fire right now still.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. My brother's up in Los Alamos, and he got evacuated once, and then was told that he might have to get evacuated again. So
yeah, 20 years ago they lost about 40 houses there.
Yeah. So thoughts and prayers with them. And then from Preseem we have Dan, who's below me in this portion, but right there. Where are you at, Dan?
Near Toronto, so Waterloo specifically, but yeah, pretty close to Toronto, so Eastern time zone. Okay.
And then we have a longtime little brother, and I think this is the first time you've been on the cast, Jeremy Austin.
Yeah, hi. I think it's probably my third or fourth time being on the cast, but first time as like a headliner guest, so it's a delight. And I'm
wonderful.
in Alaska, so I kind of split the difference here between not evenly between Greg and Dan, but I'm rounding out the time zones as we encounter this global phenomenon that is the Brothers WISP.
Yes, well, internet's needed to be everywhere, so we kind of have to spread to where we're needed, and at least bring a little bit of balance to this. I'm over here in the little state of Illinois. In a little itty bitty town called Oregon. So, which is amazing, really hilarious when I tell people where I'm from and that I'm heading home back to Oregon every time. For the non-United States listeners, there's a state called Oregon, and it's on the top left corner of northwest corner of the map. And I am kind of in the middle of the United States now. So today we're introducing a new sponsor. They help run the podcast by supporting us. You yourself can support us through Patreon, patreon.com/the Brothers WISP. There you can throw us a couple bones and join. You can get a list of our weekly topics that we talk about and links and everything. You can get our if you do $8 a month, you can join our Slack group and participate directly with each of us and interact with all sorts of crazy cats, from Tom Smith all the way to John, Osman, and even Greg. Is
I'm on there quite frequently.
Yeah, everyone's on here pretty frequently, and I'm there all the time. And then we have a shout out, and that's what Preseem's doing. And it's just so that everybody gets kind of an idea of who our sponsors are and interacts with them. This is something that we'd like to do. So I'm going to invite Jeremy and Dan to kind of give us a kind of rundown, and we'll be interacting with you guys and asking you guys some questions about Preseem and what do you guys do and what makes it so so unique and beneficial for people.
Cool. I guess maybe I can do kind of the elevator pitch, and then later on we can dig into a bunch of the details as well. So yeah, thanks for having us on. Obviously, fixed wireless WISPs are super important to us. We basically a lot of our success has come out of like the WISP shows and the WISP community. So super happy to contribute to that in any way possible, including the show. But at a really high level, basically, Preseem gives WISPs the tools to understand and proactively improve the quality of experience that they deliver their customers. So most of our customers are fixed wireless providers. We're really focused on local and regional providers, not like trying to go after the tier ones. Very different market there. And really, I guess at 50,000 foot view, we basically do this by measuring, analyzing, and then improving that quality of experience. So we measure the quality of experience by watching the traffic flow through our box. And as it does that, we extract quality of experience metrics for every IP and every subscriber. And we really think that's kind of the only way to understand the quality of experience, because you can't do it by pinging network elements, for example. It's measuring a very different thing. And then we also have another piece of software that reaches out and pulls information from the networks to build the access network topology, extract information, say from access points, modulations, frequencies, all the stuff that we need for all the stuff we'll really dig into in a few minutes. Pull that back cloud side where we do a whole lot of analysis. And I think that's where a lot of the value is. And again, probably where, Jeremy will dig into this in great detail later, but we, across our about 400 and change customers now, we collect a lot of data, and we're able to use that to build models of expected behavior. So this particular access point with these RF conditions and this configuration should behave like X, and we can tell you when it's not behaving properly and what you have to go fix. So that's one aspect of the analysis side. The other side is tying the quality of experience metrics back to topology, so we can tell you what parts of the network are delivering a poor experience. And then the last piece, which I think sometimes gets overemphasized, is the traffic optimization side. And what we do there is basically when someone's self-congesting, when they're they got a 10 meg plan and they're maxing it out, we optimize the packets that are delivered to them so they still get a great experience. And when I say that that's overemphasized, it's that kind of traffic management only works when the access network is in relatively good shape, right? Like if you have an access point that's overloaded, a backhaul that's not working, an RF connection that's really poor, it doesn't matter how smart you are in the head end choosing what packets to send. The customer's still going to get a really crappy experience. So that's why we spent basically the last year and a half building out the RF scores, and again, things we're going to dig into now to help our customers find that problems, clear that up, and then the traffic management can really make its most impact. And I think we kind of just learned that, like after we rolled out some of the traffic management stuff, it's great, it does great things, but a lot of our customers had infrastructure problems to fix first before that could help. And these tools really are targeted at making it possible to do that in a much more proactive way that scales better with less expertise. So that's specifically the new stuff that we launched a little while ago. So yeah, measure, analyze, improve the quality of experience, mostly for fixed wireless providers, but we do have some other providers as well. And I'll stop because that got a little long.
Well, I've had some elevator rides that were pretty long sometimes. So I guess coming into this conversation, I was really excited to be bringing you guys onto the show because I've really enjoyed using your products. I've enjoyed interacting with you guys at various shows. One of my first interactions with Preseem was my first WISPA Palooza, where I was going around interviewing people, and like I got to see all the stuff that you guys were working on. And I remember as like one of my first couple months starting working as a WISP, I saw your Preseem report come out. And it was like the first time I got to see like a moderately objective view of what the, what equipment performs in the industry, and what should I be expecting from the performance metrics of my equipment. And I was like, oh, hey, they're seeing more than what I'm seeing. So obviously I need to do some work. And so I as professionally have been able to benefit a lot from your contributions to the industry without having any level of working with you until, let's see, it was a year and a half ago, something like that. We had a backhaul link that we're at my previous job, and then we that was just oversubscribed out the wazoo. And I was like, told my boss, either you guys get Preseem or something, or I'm going to have to quit. And and so
That's a pretty good endorsement there, Tommy. Thank you.
Unfortunately, I was getting phone calls every single day because we had 800 megabits aggregate that we could pass through these two wireless links of one 500, one 300 megabits per second, and I had bonded them just so I could get the little bit extra. And terrible idea, don't do that. But
who would have thought LACP over wireless was a good idea?
It worked. I got 800 megs through it every single night. So we threw the Preseem box in, and I bought myself 2 months worth of peace and quiet from people not jumping down my throat because everything like just ground to a halt at night before. And then after like, I think 4 or 5 months, we ended up, we got a 10 gig fiber to the area. And so that just made life so much better. And then unfortunately we had to stop using you guys because I had way crazy different paths out to the internet for everything. And I couldn't afford using you guys moving forward. But I still really appreciate you guys. I really enjoy working with you. Jeremy's a contributor in the Little Brothers WISP. So I knew that I was not going to be objective at all in this conversation. And that's why I brought a couple other guys here. So one thing you mentioned is quality of experience. What do you mean exactly by that? And I think that's the key point.
Yeah, so we have, I think, a more expansive definition than that than maybe some other companies. So specifically for us, that kind of means three things. It's measuring the quality of experience in the way that at least correlates with the customer experience. So again, like not pinging an access point or pinging a CPU radio. It's a very, very different thing. So measuring in a way that's reflective of the customer experience. A really deep understanding of the access network. And this is back to my previous point. If the access network is not reasonably clean, everything you do on top is not going to work. So being able to tie those quality of experience metrics back to the topology, being able to understand what's really happening on the AP level, for example, in the fixed wireless case. And then lastly, the third piece is the traffic management and shaping. And I think most companies that talk about being a QoE solution, they're really talking about traffic management. They're basically, you can identify a protocol, you can shape and limit it to a particular value, do plan enforcement and stuff. And again, that's good. Like you need to do some of that stuff, although I'd argue you don't need to do the application aware stuff if we want to go down a controversial angle later. But it really only, again, helps if the access network's in good shape. And so we really think those first two parts are really important and basically how we're different than other companies that kind of claim that quality of experience umbrella.
Okay.
So how quickly, Dan, after someone implements the Preseem solution, does the cracks start to become really obvious? Like obviously when you've just onboarded, the dashboards are going ping and ding and everything's a problem, right? Until you tweak and tune it and get it looking really, really sharp. But like within that implementation period, how quickly is that really showing up all of these problems within someone's access network so that they can go and fix that before we can continue the implementation?
Yeah, pretty quickly. So I mean, as soon as we have topology, like we know which basically subscriber mapping and topology mapping is what we call it, right? As soon as we know which subscribers have which IPs and where those IPs are in the network, then that's all rolled up to say access points. So pretty quickly, you'll get a summary saying, these are all the access points with a really poor quality of experience. And often, those are the first things to go fix, like address those. Sometimes we see crazy things like you mentioned the bonded links that are bonded but not flow hashing. So there's actually tons of packet reordering and that kind of stuff goes on. But typically it's a bunch of busy APs. Some customers will immediately go fix those before they turn on the traffic management. Others will just accept that the traffic management can't help until that's cleaned up, but I'm going to turn it on for the APs that are good anyway. So those two things don't have to be serial, but you can't expect any traffic management to help if the AP is, completely out of airtime, because the AP itself is dropping all the packets.
Garbage in, garbage out, right? Like
Yeah.
that's the nature of any of these sorts of solutions.
Yep. Yeah, but it becomes pretty obvious quickly which access points are in trouble. Yeah.
And the onboarding time, what's the typical onboarding time with your solution?
Oh, that depends a lot on the network and the billing integrations and stuff. So, I mean, if it's a small, say it's a smaller provider that's got, relatively simple network, say like one choke point and a billing system we have a pre-canned integration with, it could be super quick. It could be an hour. Like it could be really, really fast. If there's custom integration, someone needs to push information to us with API, or they've got more distributed architecture, they need a couple of appliances, then it's going to stretch out a little bit. And of course, bigger ISPs just always have bigger requirements in terms of integrations. But it really is mostly that. Like the inline devices deploy as a layer 2 transparent bridge. So wherever you can put them, like a 2-layer switch, you can stick one of them. It's really mostly about the integration into the information from the rest of the network. So that subscriber information, access point information, that kind of thing.
And then like the inline devices. So like I just built we built a server that was to your specifications of like, oh, for this, it needs to be this. And then I know you guys do offer your own inline devices. I've never really interacted with those a lot. Or actually, I'm not certain if I know personally anybody who has used any of those. So what are like the ones that you offer versus like somebody who wanted to bring their own server into the fold?
Yeah, so the appliances are really an enabler for us, because it's known hardware that we understand, that we can debug, that we can test in the lab and all that stuff. So we do have lots of customers that do the bring your own hardware. As long as it's got specific NICs and meets some requirements, we'll do that. But it is a little bit, it can't just be any NIC. We try to stick to the known Intel NICs that we also have in the appliances, so we get some level of similarity there. But they're basically like 1 and 1U, depending on the depth. The 20 gig one's really deep, the 5 gig one's a little bit more narrow. And they're not that exotic of hardware. I mean, they're Intel with good Intel NICs in a 1U rack factor. And again, the benefit there is not that they're crazy custom hardware. It's that we know them, we test them, we have them in the lab, we can beat on them with a new software release, versus any hardware people bring themselves. Maybe there's weirdness there. It's harder for us to support. We still try really, really hard, but it's harder to support when we don't have one in the lab to go muck with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So
with
then,
with the NIC support there, Dan, is it because you're integrating DPDK to have to grab those NICs and into the OS?
So the DPK stuff is coming. We're working on a bunch of stuff in that area. But even with what we do now, where we still hook into the kernel drivers, it works best and is tested best with particular NICs. Again, It's one of those situations where it'll probably work with some random NICs as long as they are multi-queue and stuff. But again, we have no way to test it, and it's really hard to support that way. So really like people to use like the known good Intel NICs, a 520, a 710, for example, that again, we can replicate in our lab testing.
Right.
So like,
and particularly as you get to the higher speeds, it becomes more important to have a certified platform, because the bottlenecks end up being subtle. It's a case where performance will go over a cliff. And so you might be running along fine at a particular level of congestion, and then maybe you're hit with a DDoS or something, and you find all of a sudden this box isn't performing as well as it could. So we do need to be able to offload a fair amount of processing, because there's a lot of heavy lifting that goes on in not so much necessarily the collecting of the metrics side, although that is, you can call that special sauce. Most of the, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but most of the CPU usage is in the actual queue management and offloading packets, getting packets back out onto the network as fast as possible, so that our box in general inserts very little additional latency. It's really a bump in the wire. Yeah,
the measurement stuff adds a decent amount of CPU as well. But yeah, basically that.
So, and one question I know guys were asking was, so like for like you guys measure it in bits per second. Is there like limitations or something that somebody should be aware of when they're constructing their unit if maybe they have 500,000 1 meg customers or something like that? Is there limitations on that end as far as like numbers of queues or users that they will be limiting? Maybe they don't have to do all that much bandwidth, but is the number of queues? Because I know other services, like they just have a hard limit of how many people they can limit.
Yeah, so certainly every kind of just taking, I mean, the metrics have the same kind of curve to them, but the shapers are easy to talk about. Every shaper that's allocated takes a certain amount of memory. So yes, there is limits there. In practice, I don't think we've ever hit those. I don't think of any customer that's ever had kind of non-DDoS scenarios where that number of shapers was a limitation. Offhand, I don't even remember what the number is, but that in practice, that hasn't been the case. Again, except in the case of like a DDoS, where all of a sudden you're seeing, whatever, 100,000 IPs, and the system starts trying to allocate shapers for all of them and stuff. Then you can hit those limits.
I was just going to ask you that piece, and you started saying, non-DDoS world. Are these shapers per destination IP address inside the customer's network, or is it by flow, or is it? Can you give us a little insight of that?
Yeah, so effectively, a big part of the internal part of the system is mapping IP addresses to subscribers, and then subscribers and stuff into the topology. So in the simplest case, it's an IP per shaper if you give an IP per customer. But then some customers, of course, assign multiple IPs to an individual subscriber.
Or dual stack.
Or dual stack, that's a good example. Then it ends up on the same shaper. But in terms of just general practice, you can think of it as a shaper per subscriber.
And then how does that shaper break down into actual flows and queues, Dan?
Right. So internally, we basically, and this stuff kind of comes out of some of like the FQ Codel RFC and things that we can probably dig into in a bunch of detail if we want. But effectively, we break that down into like 4,000 virtual queues per subscriber, and then divide the traffic across that. And it's really that kind of flow separation that is where you get a lot of the latency benefits. Because even if you have one, say like a big game download happening, then that flow separation is going to ensure that all the other flows get their fair crack at the bandwidth. Things like our Zoom call don't wait behind the big fat packets for the game download. And that's all done without DPI, without signatures, all the things that make managing that really complex and really complicated.
And CGNAT, how does that impact your traffic? We've talked about sort of, 1-to-1 V4 and V6, but CGNAT obviously adds another layer of complexity.
Yeah, we're usually deployed before the CGNAT. If we're deployed at all, because then otherwise we'd have to have some kind of real-time mapping of port blocks to subscribers, and that's just a whole different thing. So our customers just put us inside the NAT.
And how does your queuing differ from a queuing that you might issue a command, say from Radius through the BNG and apply that to the user session?
Yeah, so you should think about this more generally. What we mentioned earlier, like what happened, the example that Tommy gave about the internet connection was busy and everyone's experience went horrible, right? And the reason that happens is that most traffic management solutions have a single FIFO queue where all the packets are kind of queuing in behind, right? And as soon as it starts to fall behind, from an experience perspective, everything just gets bad really, really, really fast. So that experience we've all had of like, the internet feels great at 90% link and at 100% it's unusable. That's not required for internet traffic. That's a function of poor queuing. And what FQ Codel and other AQMs like it do is try to keep those queues shorter so that huge fall off doesn't happen. And then the flow isolation further helps that by kind of dividing them out and providing some fairness across it. So you could think of what we do is like every subscriber gets one of these FQ Codel instances, and then the subscribers they're kind of like round robin across them too. So every subscriber gets a crack at the bandwidth downstream. So no one aggregate could kind of knock everybody else out and give them a bad experience.
Great.
And that part again is like some really interesting RFCs if you want to go read it. We didn't invent that. I think we tie it in with some other neat features on top, like the AP shaping and all of the integrations into the networks and the latency monitoring. But that AQM stuff itself is, in my mind, kind of one of the great kind of advances in networking in the last 10 or 15 years, because it it solves such a fundamental problem in such a simple way that in the past was solved by, application aware rules and all those other crazy things that we did as an industry for so long, and it's just not necessary anymore.
This is where I put my old man hat on and I just kind of walk around saying, my mantras are basically come down to NAT is evil, QoS is bunk.
Yes, we're not QoS.
and any of those queuing mechanisms are only needed when you don't have the bandwidth. But not having the bandwidth also means that, oh gee, the real world walks in here and these things are necessary. And
the one little thing to add there too is, like, a lot of times people are congesting on their plans, not on the network. You have a 10 meg plan, and it's that 10 meg shaper that's the problem for their experience, right?
In the WISP world, yeah.
Yeah, and that's really where putting AQM on that helps a lot. Yeah.
And there's another part of that, John, though, that particularly as we start seeing faster plans on other access technologies, that the home Wi-Fi begins to become the bottleneck. And this, the fiber industry has this problem just as badly. And there's still a need to have proper queuing at every stage where there is a step down in bandwidth, or you are going to end up having a poor customer experience. So I think the fact that we are analyzing that access network all the way down to the end user device ends up being really helpful when you're trying to troubleshoot that type of thing, even in an environment where you might not, as the ISP, have full control and the ownership of the user's in-home Wi-Fi. I know there's certainly a trend in that direction, and I think it's a good trend. I think it's important that the operator really be able to understand the quality of experience all the way down into the end user's home, which is partly why we measure things the way we do.
And one thing that I have been a big proponent of guys implementing proper queuing mechanisms inside of their network, just in general. And one reason why I'm a fan of Preseem, because it's an easy, just easy button, do this, and then not only is your bandwidth limiting taken care of, but also you start to get pretty decent queuing. But also in home and then in their network infrastructure as well. So I've done a lot of work with people on implementing FQ Codel in their network in general. So interfaces and such, actually having that. And one of the things that I know that I've experienced multiple times, first when I did Preseem once, and then when I upgraded a network to router SV7 and then started using FQ Codel and Cake inside of our network for our bandwidth limiting and our interfaces, was we stopped getting phone calls from people who, in the middle of the day, my internet is broken, and it turns out that the kid's Xbox was eating up all the bandwidth because FQ Codel leaves room for just raw FQ Codel, leaves room in the bandwidth plan for other services to come in and is able to react quickly and appropriately to say, oh, Steam download, you do not get to have all the connection now, you need to slow down while so that a video call can happen. Literally overnight, they just off.
And what's cool about that is that happened, and you didn't need to sit down and identify all the applications you personally care about or guess that your customer cares about, and then write rules that say,
or your DSCP markings.
If X, Y, Z, Z, blah, 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 give it high priority. It's kind of like emergent behavior, just the way it should be, right? It's just so simple.
Yeah, so that's a really big thing, and that's actually something that a couple people probably are a little bit curious about, is with the proliferation of either Mikrotik's router SV7 coming with FQ Codel and Cake, and then also, there's a ton of open source implementations and straightforward built for ISP level services. For a really long time, FQ Codel and Cake, I've been on their forums and I've interacted with their guys. They don't have a lot of ISPs who've interacted with them. So that's been one of the holdups for implementing, is the guys who have built these things haven't been focused towards ISPs and haven't had a lot of ISP experience in working with stuff. And ISPs they didn't know how to implement it. And so That's one reason why I really think that you guys had a really cool thing. But now that there's that proliferation, what is the kind of like, because that's a one question that I know a lot of guys are going to be asking is, well, if I can get some of these benefits without the cost of implementing your stuff in the network, what am I looking for? How does that benefit a guy?
Yeah, so I think that's back to what we said earlier about our definition of QoE is you need to find those access network problems and then you do shaping. So and this really came out of like our first interaction with customers is we just seen that pattern over and over again, which is why we went off for a year and a half and built all this other stuff. Because even if a customer, I mean, we can get into the specific details of how, things we layer on top on the traffic management side, which I think have value. It's still, that's not where the main value of Preseem is. The main value of Preseem is understanding the quality of experience, understanding what part of the networks aren't delivering good experience so that you can be proactive, you can go fix it. And then again, the traffic managed part is real value. Like I don't mean to discount that in any way, but it's the next piece afterwards. So yeah, if you implement FQ Codel strictly on a per sub basis, in a tower router, you're going to get some of those same traffic benefits. We do some tweaks to that. Like we give a lot more queues. We tweak a bunch of the settings down to keep interactivity a little bit better. We do shorter quantums, a bunch of things that are pretty CPU intensive in terms of we make it work a lot harder. But conceptually, that part is almost the same. But what you're not going to get is the access point shaping layered on top. We have a bunch of other stuff like that coming. But really, most importantly, like the understanding the quality of experience and being told, on this access point, it is this CPE radio you need to fix, that he's the one hurting all the other customers. That's really where the real value of Preseem is.
Right.
You just talked about oh, go ahead. I was going to ask.
I was just to wrap that one up a little bit is to say, like, there's nothing inherently wrong with, say, running FQ Codel or Cake on ARM, for example, on the Mikrotik boxes. There are some deficiencies in the way that it's been deployed, according to Dave Tott, who wrote FQ Codel and Cake. So there are some things that we would lose if we were trying to use the Mikrotik hardware as our deployment platform. We absolutely could do so. And maybe it will make sense for us to do so in the future once Router OS 7 gets stable and it's more widely deployed. Right now, x86 is still providing the best bang for buck in terms of giving us the flexibility in the platform to really collect all the metrics that we need. And we consider those metrics to be far more important than just the shaping, as Dan is saying, not to beat a dead horse.
Okay, and Jeremy you said something earlier about bandwidth step up, step down points, and Dan was talking about the APs, things like that. So I'm just kind of curious, are you running into people that are using this to get insight on other point to multi-point technology points like DSLAMs or PON systems or things like that?
Yeah. So the bulk of our customers, just because we started, basically by going to WISP shows, are fixed wireless providers, but many of them also have some DSL and some fiber, and they often run that through Preseem as well. Where we're not as complete there as we will be in the next while is we kind of fake those out as a DSLAM sits in our UI as an access point, essentially, because they use the API to manually map in and say, this is a AP called DSLAM 1. But once we have that topology information, we can do everything that we do on the wireless side to say that DSLAM is the one that's delivering poor experience. And what we're started on in the fiber side is the same thing with an individual pawns.
The core of what we do is really access layer agnostic. Even when we come down to talking about the quality of experience measurement on the RF layer, RF is just one. I mean, as you know, it's all DSP. Whether it's on cable, whether it's on twisted pair copper, or whether it's on glass, it's all DSP. So the underlying algorithms that we use to generate those metrics extend beautifully to other access layer technologies, and then it becomes just a question of marketing and building out the UI to handle the eccentricities of that particular case.
Well, integrations too, right? So we can reach into a fixed wireless network and figure out who's where. We don't have that capability in a fiber network yet, but that's becoming a priority.
I think we do.
One of the things that you've
we do.
One of the things that you've highlighted, I guess, is as network engineers, we like to think our shit doesn't stink. And what you guys are really saying is, if you fix underlying problems from an OSI model up, then all of a sudden you're actually implementing better network engineering, and naturally the stability of your network improves as well as the customer's quality of experience. It really is that multifaceted and layered approach, which we all get taught in networking 101, right? And then we finish our CCNA, CCNP, and we go out the window. I know how to do it better than that. And a lot of that gets forgotten. So we get to the point where we go and do these massive implementations, and we sit there scratching our head going, why is there a problem? And it's, well, we don't have good monitoring, we don't have good metrics, we don't have good implementation. We've put that, it's only temporary, right? We're only just doing this temporarily. Everything's temporary until it's permanent. And 5 years later, we're coming back to fix the problem. But once you start to unravel, that the babushka doll, you take the doll out of the doll out of the doll, and you get to that root cause of the problem. That's where the value of the product starts to become evident, is that, the root cause was actually that bad radio.
A layer down.
The radio was out of alignment.
Right. At the risk of maybe being a little controversial, that like if you're in a traffic managing, say, particular application to say make Netflix stop buffering, you didn't really fix the problem. The problem is the access network's not delivering the service. Right.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, our thinking is how do we help our customers get the most out of their network, not constrain things on the other side. And your point about going to fix things in fixed wireless, it's really hard. Right? Like I know a bit of RF. Jeremy's way more of an RF expert than I am, but it's like a bit of a black art. And if you don't have a whole bunch of radios to kind of build up that intuition, how do you know when it's working well? And that's really, this is probably where I can hand it off, let Jeremy talk for a while, this is really what we try to do with these RF scores, is like boil down all this black magic that's in people's heads who really understand RF, and just give them a number that says whether this particular connection is good or bad or needs to be fixed. And not only does that make people who don't have the RF knowledge more, capable of doing things, it also frees up the people that do have RF knowledge, instead of staring at charts all day long, to go fix it.
Well, SNMP can only show you so much, right?
Well, yeah, because you need to look at it over time, and then you need to cross-correlate across your network and other networks, and to bring those insights out.
I look at it from the standpoint that once you have a network that's actually working, you need to go look and see what the individual participants at the endpoints, where they're having problems. And if you can't see what those problems are, then you can't go find the ways to fix things for them. And I think you're giving everybody a great tool to be able to see that on an individual participant level.
Well, and I guess one question, one thing that I think is really important, and one thing that I always found was really, really interesting was like what the metrics. Do you think you could describe some of the metrics that you're looking at and that you were displaying in the RS world? Like was, if I recall correctly, you had retransmits, TCP retransmits that you were doing, because I always had like a static like 3% for a lot of my network that was just constant. And that was a long time hunting that one down. And then a few other different things. Could you maybe describe kind of what some of that stuff is? Yeah,
so there's kind of two layers there. So there's the network and transport layer from an OSI standpoint of, bytes transfer. Like we measure this all down on a per IP basis. Layer 3 and 4. Measure this down on a per IP basis, and we collect the metrics and publish to the cloud every 10 seconds for every IP address. So throughput, packet rate, latency, TCP retransmissions, something else I'm forgetting right now. And once that's all, basically we take that and we decorate it with a topology, and then we do the analysis. So we can say in this part of the network, the latency is X, and this part it's Y, and the packet rate's this, and all that kind of stuff. And that's really the QoE, the subscriber QoE measurement part of it. But Jeremy could probably go into more detail into like what's the layer down, which is all the new RF information we extract and then correlate back with all that stuff.
Right. So we call it Preseem Plus because we really want to highlight that this is still Preseem. This is still QoE, and that is that analysis of that underlying layer. If we had built it the other way around, then RF would be the base product, and all the layer 3 analysis would be on top of that. What we attempt to do is really create an access layer expert system, as Dan mentioned, I think, where we want to take the hard part of getting experience as an operator, particularly if you're, on the RF side, and turn those, those gut instincts that you learn over time into something that you can actually transmit to someone else. We have, particularly as folks like, all of us are, we didn't start out yesterday, even babyface Tommy, and we've got some experience here. Dan ran a WISP right out of high school. He's being modest. He really does know a bit about RF, and we find that ultimately when we want to level up, as whether we're a single operator WISP and you're wanting to add add employees and grow, or whether you're looking to be acquired, or whether you want to move on and do something else in your life, become the CEO, there has to be a way to actually level other people up faster. And so that was part of my my inspiration for building the features that would become Preseem Plus. And I was working in an environment where there was lots of RF being deployed and a shortage of people who really understood what happens when you don't protect the asset that is that shared layer. So to just very briefly go through the kind of the initial wave of features that we released in March as Preseem Plus. This is an add-on to the base package, essentially with the QoE measurement that we have with the base Preseem. We call that Preseem Essentials. We give you all of the data that you need to be able to find problems in your network, but it's going to be the same as it is with some of your vendor tools, where you are having to stare and compare. You're having to learn what is normal for a particular deployment of that combination of equipment and framing types and channel width and frequency band and power output and antenna gain and all of the things that we have become accustomed to just studying their bread and butter as RF guys. So with Preseem Plus, however, we want to still give you access to all the raw data, but now give you interpretation on top of that, build that expert system. So on the RF side, we start with what we just call an RF score. We basically take kind of 4 dimensions of performance, that basically your upstream and downstream performance, and then stability. How stable is that performance? This is partly, we've talked a little bit about needing to apply some interpretation onto looking at a link rate graph, is that in most deployments, RF is a dynamic. It's expected to be dynamic. There's going to be a daily curve, not just in terms of traffic usage with the daily peaks and valleys, but it is a dynamic system, and we expect a certain amount of dynamicity out of that. So what we do is we look at our entire global data set, we aggregate all that data together, and for every combination of vendor equipment and configuration parameters, we build a statistical profile which says, here's what's normal for this equipment as the operators actually deploy it in the field. Not just what the manufacturer spec sheet says, but here is what our operators globally are determining is the most effective, best way to actually use this equipment. Because we can compare, obviously. There are going to be some operators who maybe are playing a little faster and looser, or maybe just don't have it applied in exactly the right environment. And maybe their scores are going to be a little bit lower. And then you have some operators on the other end of the scale who are really particular about how they deploy and what their installation standards are. And they're going to be on the higher end of that scale. So by normalizing that across all vendors, now immediately you can look at your network and look at all of your CPEs and all of your access points and immediately know how that equipment is performing against the global performance profile. Then secondly, we take this combination of the network performance and then user behavior. We combine those two things together and we give you, I think Dan mentioned this a little bit, we can tell you immediately which equipment in your network do you need to go fix first because it's harming your ability to sell bandwidth to other people. We talk about this a few, we've said this a few times at shows and stuff, that the contract, what we say we're selling to our subscribers is bandwidth, but what we're actually selling them is the ability to use some of our airtime, that precious airtime. So if you have customers that are using that airtime inefficiently, you absolutely want to be taking care of those customers first to improve the value of your network, allow you to sell more, allow you to sell bigger plans, and get a better ROI out of your equipment. So to that end, on the access point side, we basically give you measurements of access point health. How is this a normal amount of loading for this access point? How am I doing in terms of the total airtime consumption, things of that nature. So both at the CPE and the AP side, we give you some just instant tools to know exactly which parts of your network are most likely to be affecting that user quality of the experience in a predictive way. It's a little more predictive than just the latency collection. Like with the latency collection and those metrics and loss, we can tell you if there's a problem right now. With the RF analytics and the user behavior analytics, we can give you a little bit more visibility into the future to say, okay, here's where I need to be in a few months in terms of capacity, rather than just being reactive and waiting until things deteriorate. Our motto is, by the time the customer has to call already, I don't want to use the word fail, but you've lost their soul. Ideally, it should just work in a perfect world.
So in terms of how you guys hook into that, are you hooking in via APIs to different vendors, CPEs? And then I guess an extension to that is, are you doing backhaul as well? Are you looking at the actual backhaul technology across vendors?
You want to take this one, Dan?
Sure. Yeah, we don't do much with backhauls yet. We're very focused on the access edge. And I think that's going to continue because in general, we think the backhauls are sort of an easier problem, right? Like they're, two radios pointed at each other. You can look at the modulations, all that stuff. It's just somewhat easier than the messiness of the edge. We definitely would like to do that, but it's not going to be our next priority. Our next priority is some of the stuff for other access technologies like fiber, probably. It would be really fun, and we think we can apply a bunch of the same things there. But again, it seems like it doesn't seem like it's nearly as big of a pain point.
I think you're right. It's probably not as big a pain point, but I think there's different layers here at different parts of the business. As WISPs are growing, you start out with your 5 gig backhauls, and then you realize that, as those radios get loaded, they're not designed to do backhaul. All of a sudden there's interference. And then when you're trying to mitigate that problem, it's very much the same as doing an access edge. But when you start moving into the big boys toys and you start deploying, Ciclu or NEC or Raycom or any of the bigger commercial vendors out there who are selling a licensed microwave product, and you've got clean air time, you've got either here in Australia, ACMA or FCC in the US, you've bought your channel, you've got a bit more guarantee. Absolutely. That reduces that impact. And really the stuff that starts to impact that backhaul is either alignment issues, radio physical hardware issues. Those are the sorts of things that we start to see in the field, or the good old someone starting to build a building.
Yeah, or a tree grows up in the middle.
Exactly.
All of those sorts of things.
Yeah, so the question about when do we need to really incorporate backhaul analytics into this? It is a good one, and as Dan said, we would love to do it, but yeah, there's just simply an order of magnitude. It's just order of magnitude. It's at least one, maybe two degrees down in terms of difficulty of tracking. And there's the other aspect of it, which is with Preseem Plus, we're really trying to help you to optimize the ROI of what you're putting out in the field, right? Know when exactly you need to spend money to upgrade the equipment that's at the edge. And that happens more often from a life cycle perspective, maybe less often from a total capacity perspective, but the economics of doing that on your backhaul are such that I would say, maybe this is my opinion, there really is not a lot of money to be made as an operator in heavily compressing your backhaul, right? You really need headroom there. It's much less deterministic.
Unless you're doing something like traffic engineering and you're actually steering your traffic the way that you need to steer it based on link capacity and availability, then your backhaul needs to be watched, and you need to monitor that. And in a failover,
you're right. In a failover situation, all that goes out the window and correct. Like I've had upstream providers where they were able to manage via QoS. They're able to manage failover at a ratio of like 10 to 1. If the primary path went down, the backup path. Well, the problem is that if you're optimizing your ROI on your primary path correctly, then there's no amount of traffic shaping on the backup link that's going to save you in that environment. Like the economics just aren't there. It doesn't make sense to do that from a product delivery. Here's the product that I'm delivering to my end customer. So, and as you have pointed out, operators eventually get to the cycle where now licensed microwave isn't sufficient, and we're having to go to fiber. In which case, you're talking about much longer. You're going to be using that 10 gig link for a lot longer than you were using that 500 megabit unlicensed path, right? So there's
But
definitely
failover is a completely different discussion. Like when we start going down the discussion around how much money do I implement and how much is my customer paying me? Well, that's going to be a really different discussion for every business, because
correct.
John's business might do resi, my business might do B2B only. So the
Right.
plan and the value that I sell my customer is different. If John's customer can't watch Netflix, it's probably not going to stop things. If my customer can't run their business, well, that's probably going to be a bigger problem if they can't trade, they can't run their point of sales, they can't get shipped packages out the door. So it's a different level of what makes me sleep at night that you go and implement, right? At the end of the day, we all like to be asleep at 2 o'clock in the morning, but how much money do you go and implement to go and overcome these problems?
And you raised an interesting point as well earlier, Greg, when we were talking about the operators who, for example, might want to implement traffic shaping to, I mean, to put it bluntly, reduce the amount of traffic flowing across their network that they're serving to their end customers. Because there are operators who maybe you have a constraint in a particular area. You've got that backhaul constraint problem that Tommy was talking about. And as a temporary measure, that might seem like it's a necessary part of network engineering, but long-term as a strategy to actually make money as an operator, I don't feel that has any headroom. It doesn't have any legs. So our approach, I say I came to this later than Dan, but at Preseem here, but our approach is to allow the network to be optimized so that the needs of the end user, who will continually want more bandwidth, and the needs of the operator, who needs to make money while they wait to do the next upgrade. There's this network upgrades are a stair step, but there's a straight diagonal line for consumption and usage as it rises. So we feel like if we can optimize those two needs, balance those two needs, then we are going to save the network operator money, and our customers clearly agree with us on that one. But long term, there are some approaches that some of our competitors take, for example, that give an operator more control over, say, controlling a particular type of traffic. And as a band-aid, who am I to say that's not a good business practice for somebody? As an operator of 25 years experience, I don't see that has legs. So that's not our focus at Preseem. It's not something we couldn't do. It's just not our focus.
But I think that comes back to the whole business discussion, is that you're dealing with such a mixed bag of customers, everything from local regionalized ISPs who may have bandwidth constraints to their area, all the way through to what we would call, a third world country who may be deploying based on the only access technologies or hand-me-down technologies that have come from other WISPs who have, I know that we ship a lot of things at EOL to countries that can't afford it, so that they can at least have some internet and they've got some deployment technologies. So it's going to be at different ends of the scale, depending on what type of business, where you're at in the life cycle, where you're willing to invest money, how much GP you make on your product, what type of end customer you're trying to service. That profile and that avatar for the end customer changes, and therefore the need for QoE changes and the definition of QoE changes, not so much from a customer experience. We're all trying to deliver a really good customer experience, not only from a customer service standpoint, but from when I click the button, what happens on my screen as the customer sees it. But every customer then is going to have different expectations as to what that experience looks like.
There's a really good point, Greg. And there's this ongoing discussion right now in the United States where there's a large infusion of cash coming to the internet industry from the federal government that will be administered by the states, that is largely being steered toward this fiber first future. And from a quality of experience perspective, fiber alone isn't going to be the total solution, right? It's delivering the best bits to the customer that create that good customer experience. Like no matter how fat the pipe is coming into the home, you could bring in a 2.5 gig, a 5 gig, a 10 gig pipe. If that customer has poor Wi-Fi off the end of it, or is trying to go sit out in the yard where they don't have coverage, the ISP will still get blamed. And we know that there are solutions for that. That's why we do what we do. It's not there's no. You talked previously about the the FQ Codel being the easy button. I've called it that as well, Tommy, on the product side, because it really does make most things better. But the combination of the two, having that complete understanding of what your access layer is doing, plus appropriately applied shaping, it's a winning combo. And
But I guess
ideally
the point,
more ISPs get on that bandwagon.
Yeah.
the point you
so-
raise there, it comes down to that whole, how many paracetamol do you take to make the problem hurt less
Yeah.
before
Well,
it becomes a problem? Because that's really all you're doing. Eventually you've got to rip the band-aid off and
Yeah,
look at it and go, oh my God, it's woozing and it's oozing and it's really, really sore now. And that comes down to the
Mhm.
quality of experience doesn't just impact your customer,
Yeah.
as Tommy alluded to earlier. It impacts you as the service provider, as the technician, as the business owner,
Yeah.
because that pain to you comes in different shapes, sizes, flavors, and everything else. The pain is increased support calls, which increased support calls means you start to eat into your GP.
Ultimately,
every month.
the customer's never
Mhm.
wrong. It's the customer, their pain will become your pain. You might be able to put it off, but
absolutely.
you're right. It's like
Absolutely.
wearing shoes a size too small and then taking an aspirin, right?
Yeah.
It's-
Well,
and the
for my
pain comes in
example,
technology or money or business or whichever point. You've just got to bite that bullet and work out where it is so that you can
Mhm.
actually go and be accepting of the problem so you can fix it.
Yeah, well, and like for my example, for like how my first experience with Preseem, I got 2 months of nice peace and quiet. But at the end of that 2 months, that was during this massive period of expansion. There was a bunch of houses being built, and we were adding in like 30 customers a month after this, or not 30 customers. We could add 20 customers a week easily behind this backhaul, and when we finally put in that 10 gig, we went from 800 megs per second of usage for 600 odd customers all the way up to, I think we jumped the first night was like 1.1 gigabits per second. And then at the end of the week after that, when people they realized like, oh, hey, stuff's working. We were all the way up at 1.3, 1.4 gigabits per second aggregate for those customers. And there was only 2 months. Like I was like 6 months after we implemented Preseem before we got the bandwidth connectivity, the fiber connection in. And like in those last 4 months, turned back, we started getting phone calls again, and it started coming back. So, Preseem didn't solve the problem perfectly. They can, and you can only improve the experience. Once you have only so much, you're just optimizing your utilization of that. And, once again, it's not like you're trying to solve all the problems. You're just solving the problems that are being brought to you in a really specific and I think really excellent way. But I only ever got the Preseem like classic experience. And then you guys have been really talking about the Preseem Plus. So like, I'm guessing Preseem Plus is going to be an add-on. Is that my understanding?
They're actually two kind of independent tiers. So
Okay.
as Jeremy kind of alluded to, that the essentials, you have access to all the information we collect. It's all in the UI. You can go to every access point, look at all the charts, all that kind of stuff. And includes all the traffic management stuff as well. The plus is really that kind of statistical analysis, using the global data set to give you predictions and all that stuff. That's on top. So if you have a relatively small network and you feel like you can look at your APs regularly and kind of have a bit of a gut sense of what they should be doing, Essentials is going to get you there. If you've got a big network and you just want to be told every day, these are my worst CPU radios, these are my worst APs, that's what Plus solves.
Yeah.
So
It-
we
it
definitely
just
are
is-
finding that even smaller companies, particularly if they don't yet have an RF expert on hand, it's helping them out too. And then larger companies where they really need to operationalize, here's the truck rolls we're doing this week or in this management cycle, we're absolutely shortening the time for that. So there's definitely the part I think that it might be a little bit harder to sell to just be quite honest about it, are small to medium-sized companies where they have a really good RF expert, and that RF expert wants to keep doing what they're doing, right? Which tells me that we're doing our job, which is to distill the the knowledge and wisdom of the RF experts in this field. You know, I've leveraged, it's not all just from my head. I've leveraged a lot of really smart guys in this field to develop this, you know, the algorithms behind this product. And our goal is that, you know, as those companies grow and they people want to replace themselves and realize, okay, I need to now train my successor, then I think that the Preseem Plus is going to really help them do that.
Okay.
Can I bounce someplace else? I want to ask about, and maybe showing my ignorance of the product here. Everything we've been talking about, Dan said something about placing things before CGNAT and describing some of the customers that you have and things like that make me think that you've absolutely sold me. It's an incredible product. We get great insight, and at times we can fix some temporary issues that are going on. But everything we've been talking about sounds like very stubby networks. What do you have that actually deals with multiple ingress and egress paths and things of that nature?
So the
Great question.
layer of collecting metrics from the network, that's kind of logically, we call it the polar. That's kind of logically like SNMP and stuff, right? Like reaching out to the network, collecting all the information. So that doesn't actually really interact too much with the traffic flows as a whole. So some of the scores and stuff are powered there. In terms of the inline device doing traffic shaping and measuring latency as the packets flow through and stuff, we need to be deployed at a spot where that subscriber's traffic is bidirectional at the same spot. So if you've got a super highly meshy network, that can get to be a challenge. In practice, what we see across almost all of our customers is they tend to have like a one spot where the traffic comes, whether that's back to kind of like an access layer with a BRAS or something like that, and the mesh is behind us.
Is that because of the size of networks you're working with, or I mean, does that say something about the market you're working with, or am I missing something there?
It probably
I could talk a little bit about this, Dan.
Yeah, go ahead.
So what we find is there's a kind of a lower to mid size of ISP that is big enough to have multiple drains, but isn't yet big enough to do regional concentrators. And those are the ones that tend to have to do the most re-architecting, where they've like, oh, I put a data center in 2 states, and they didn't think about, okay, now how do you actually control that traffic? You now have ingress in 2 locations. That when they get a little bit bigger than that, they realize, you know, long term that alone isn't enough from a traffic management perspective. And they've started to deploy regional concentrators, as Stan said, whether it's a BRAS or some form of local aggregation. And in those cases, we have no problem because you can use as many boxes as you want in your network. And you know, we have operators with many boxes in their networks because they get to that scale. It will make logical sense when you consider that when we are measuring the round trip access layer latency, you have to be able to measure with very high accuracy, very high, clock precision, the packets and the ACKs that are coming back. So if you were to separate those out and put those in 2 different parts of your network, it could still be measured, but you would now be transferring state across potentially a jittery network in between, and you would lose on the measurement side. Dan could probably speak a little more to that. You'd lose a little bit of precision there. On the plan enforcement side, you would lose the concept that flow isolation that's critical, where you need to be able to measure an entire to properly queue a customer's entire service plan. You have to be able to isolate those flows from each other, and splitting them into 2 different locations would mean there's no practical way to isolate them anymore. So you'd still get some benefit. You could still say, okay, we're going to cap your plan at 25 megs, 50, 100, whatever it is, and say, okay, well, this half is getting 60 and that half is getting 40. You could do it, but you'd lose so much of the benefit that we get of doing this at really high, really low latency, that these traffic queuing decisions are being made, that we don't see that from an architectural standpoint, it makes sense for us to prioritize multiple drains in that way.
Sure. And so if we have multiple devices sitting out there taking care of each of their own little stubby network, is there a roll up of all that data into a
Correct.
central
It all
machine
goes to
somewhere?
the same place. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all like all the cloud side. It doesn't care if the metrics are coming from 1 box or 10. You see exactly the same thing. You pick an access point, you see the metrics going to that access point, or a subscriber, for example. So there is an area of the UI where you can look at the stats per box, but the main views are entirely agnostic to how many boxes are actually processing.
It's a scale out architecture. Right. We do it as Dan has said, we have some plans in the works to dramatically increase the amount of payload that we can run through a single box, which would allow some of the larger operators to begin to collapse a little bit, perhaps. In general, what we see about the size of a decently sized BRAS is usually handled by a single box.
And in terms of the boxes, do you have a fail safe option? So if the box itself fails, obviously it's a bridge.
We insist that our operators always build a path around us. That's typically via an IGP and BFD, for example. Obviously, it can be done at layer 2 spanning tree, but we don't prefer that. You'll get much better performance if you route around us.
We do have appliances that have physical bypass in them, but honestly, no one it's expensive. No one should use them. Like you're better off to use OSPF as a bypass path than rely on some an internal bypass to kick
dead man switch.
Yeah.
And that means that we can sleep at night because, for one, our boxes are very stable in the field, but two, if it fails, the worst situation is that you're going to have, some period of less than optimal traffic enforcement, and in the short term, that's really going to be fine.
And work up from there.
Right.
Yeah. So just as an FYI for the cheaters out there, they insist that you do it, but you don't have to prove to them that you can do it.
Correct.
FYI.
And if it fails, and it doesn't, and there's no bypass, then we
it's
say,
all on you.
Tell me, what does this topology look like? Yes, exactly. Now, most operators, obviously, it costs. It's one additional port typically. We usually do a switch adjacent topology. So you're really just putting us as a stub off of a switch or a switch stack, for example. And, the cost is low to add us in most cases. It might get more complex if you're having to run additional fiber to some remote data center for your aggregation or whatever. But in most cases, we're able to be deployed, physically very near the equipment that is, we talked about CGNAT, that's going to be upstream or whatever your IP allocation mechanism is.
What about the question I saw earlier today? I think it was probably in a Facebook group that said, hey, look, Mikrotik is putting Docker back in place. What are the odds of us having something scaled small enough and with those pieces to sit on routers as the generations continue? We're going to have more and more routing pieces that have more and more computing on there. Are you going to go into that type of world, or are you not going to say anything about it yet?
We don't have any philosophical barriers to doing that. I mean, we don't, again, the hardware for us is an enabler to solve the problem. We're not trying to be like box pushers, like Cisco or something. So it's not our main thing. But there's some real, when you come to moving packets, it's a very different thing than just running an application. So in terms of whatever, I don't know exactly what Mikrotik's doing, but the virtual NICs and the timing and the throughput and the packet rates, it's much trickier than just running, I'll make a crazy example, running a web server on there, right? Like that doesn't need to have sub-millisecond scheduling and stuff to keep the packets moving. If it blocks for 500 milliseconds or 10 milliseconds, it really doesn't matter. So I don't know their implementation well enough. I mean, if there was ever a way that in really cheap hardware, we could insert and do all our stuff
and get accelerated. Yeah, it get an accelerated path. Sure. I don't see
probably
it
not going to be Docker.
Soon.
It's not exactly. Because the virtual NICs are a challenge sometimes to guarantee the performance you need for packets. Again, very different than applications.
Even with your headline virtualization environments like VMware and the heavily commercial ones, it is very difficult to do high speed packet handling without significant overhead, which is why we're basically
PCI
needing to be.
Yeah, well, that's the only real way to get it is to use DPDK or PCI pass-through and actually assign physical hardware.
Correct. And so the way that those switch chips are built on, let's say, the Mikrotik routers in general, it's not like you have access to one NIC. So it seems unlikely. That said, if there are any components of ours that make sense to be deployed in a distributed fashion like that, we can't say never.
So on the business side of things, we've talked a lot about the technical side of things. How do you guys integrate with other platforms? You've obviously need to hook into billing platforms, something like Sonar, who's another one of our sponsors here on the Brothers WISP. You hook into something like that?
Yeah, so we have a page on our website with the integrations that we support. It's a bunch of the common billing systems that you'd see in the fixed wireless space. Of course, Sonar's one of them there. And yeah, we basically get an API key and our system just reaches in and starts extracting out the list of APs, the subscriber assignments, all that stuff. We kind of use it as like a priming. So we go in, get it, and then we go out and kind of do our own probleming because we need
Verify
slightly
that it's
different
real.
information. Yeah. We need slightly different information than we can just get entirely by just pulling from them. And then, you know, every plan change you make and all that stuff in Sonar, we're just going to see that in real time and update our shapers topology maps.
Okay, great. So you are mapping that data.
Yeah,
And
yeah. We try to get as much, like we don't want to ask people to enter it twice anywhere. Like that's
Right.
not much fun.
Correct. And we have integrations with certainly all the ones that are in common use in the WISP world. And for ones that are uncommon, we have a public API, which is pretty easy to use to push in the critical information. And we have plenty of operators who are using that method as well.
Great.
Well, and another side note for the cheaters out there, or if you don't have a billing system, Google spreadsheets is
Yeah.
at least was an option.
We don't like to mention it, but yes, we can support a manual option as well.
Yeah, it worked great for me for that time period. So I loved it. I thought it was hilarious. So like Preseem and Preseem Plus, like is like Preseem Plus something that could be picked up separately for a guy? Like he can go like, hey, I just need I just want the like expertise to bring to my network, or are they like Preseem Plus is just a step above Preseem?
Yeah, it's really a step above today. We don't break out I mean, I guess maybe what you're asking for there is, can you do just the expert system-y stuff without the traffic management part is maybe kind of what you're saying. And we don't break that out like that today. We really kind of see and partially because the two of them together are a lot better when we can kind of do it all in one spot and combine information. Maybe someday we'll do that. But for right now, it's really that kind of essentials is like, again, all you need to do if you have the knowledge and then the expert systems layered on top.
Yeah, we would certainly have to charge a little bit more for it as a separate product. So can't say we will never do it, but right now, as Dan says, it really makes the entire system sing, and when you're doing them together. And what we're finding is that people who are coming to Preseem new are by and large just going right ahead and going to Plus. It really does make a lot of sense.
And then when you're matching customers up from like in like a billing system structure, so if your billing system is able to keep track of what your customer's IPv4 is versus their and their IPv6, because you guys support dual stack and you have for a while. So as long as the billing system knows what they have, or they have a /56 in IPv6 world or /48, you guys are just going to be able to take it and run with that.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. We just pull that back and the subscribers traffic then just gets put basically into the same shaper for whatever you can think of as like a /32 in IPv4 and a /56 in IPv6. It all gets bundled into the same shaper.
Okay, cool. Well, let's see. Jean, I brought you here to be the voice of reason. Do you have some more? Do you have some other comments or thoughts you from your realms of experience?
I think that was the nice way of saying John's the old grumpy guy.
Something changed on here.
The Muppets.
Not only, actually, there's another story there. When we get together, we'll drink whiskey and talk about that one. But
you're going through a tunnel, John. I can't hear you. It must be your quality of experience isn't very good.
Oh,
what I'm trying to figure out is the UI changed while I was looking at this, and I couldn't unmute. So Dan, I'm going to ask you to, I got distracted by something here. I want you to go back and talk about what you were just saying about the /56 and that, because that's actually one of my notes on here I have is, are you looking at IPv6 stats by /64, or are you doing it, by individual IP address, because with the customers in the IPv4 world, you're doing it at the IP address level. And since I don't know anything about this product, what do you do for the IPv6 customers? Are you looking at each of their individual IP addresses, or are you looking at some larger aggregate?
Right. So it's sort of a combination. So the flow table has to be necessarily built with the full IP address because we need the whole 5 tuple. So when we're tracking latency on a TCP flow and stuff, the internal flow table is the whole thing. We aggregate the stats though to a /64 as we publish them to the cloud. And that may change at some point, but it's really just comes down to the kind of the cardinality of the data set because of all the privacy addresses and the randomized address generation and all that stuff. The set of IPs we would have to track is kind of unbounded, right? And that's a real problem for some database systems. So we're in the process of migrating to one that cares about that a lot less, but it does get to be a problem when you could have, you know, an individual logical subscriber with, well, pretty much an effectively unlimited space, right? I mean, if they wanted to be nasty, they could send a packet from each of the 2 to 64 IPs, and that gets to be an interesting thing. So yeah, so the box basically tracks flows per full 5 tuple, but when it publishes stats, it aggregates to the /64.
So all of you people out there,
or whatever the prefix is that you've assigned to the customer.
Well, no, it still aggregates to /64, and then you can still assign a /56, but the stats are published counted against the /64.
Got it. Thank you.
So if we're being nice, we shouldn't just iterate through every IP address that's available in our 64 and just throw things out.
Yeah, ideally don't do that. Yeah.
Ooh, I shouldn't have said that out loud.
I mean, it shouldn't blow anything up, but it's like, I would love to get to a world where we'd actually do keep all the stats for every IP. We have some architectural changes, and then there's even some other downsides to think about beyond that too. You know, does that actually give us much useful information into the home? It does somewhat, but that was a decision based on some of the back end things we were using that we could not have that infinite space, so we had to aggregate it to /64.
I think every time you pick an answer to that one, another thing will pop up, and you'll say, "Oh, but we could have." I mean, there's just too many.
Engineering's about trade-offs.
Yeah.
Well, and then so we've been kind of talking as like the customer as a single queue. Do you guys have any like roadmap or options right now for like saying, okay, so I have a customer but let's say they have 4 locations and they're paying for an aggregate of 100 megabits per second. Is there a way of me being able to say like, okay, you can put any, I believe as I recall, you could put any number of IPs underneath that and it would all aggregate to that. Could I like say, all right, this place has 40% of that dedicated, or is that all just like
well, think of it as from a service plan perspective. Like if you're selling that customer one service plan in 4 different locations, then clearly that would be a shared bucket. But if you were selling them 4 different IPs in 4 different locations with different plans, naturally in your customer management system, you would be representing those as different service plans because they'd have different speed allocations according, on them. And Preseem will handle either of those scenarios. Does today.
Yeah. The bundle though. Just to clarify a little bit, like the bundling of 100 meg and then like the 40s underneath. That's not something that works out of the box today. But typically, what people do is, I mean, especially they end up with, like, if you say like a car dealership, it's got multiple, they may be on separate boxes anyway. So they'll tend to map those as like 4 individual subscribers in our system, even though in the billing system, they're one system. It's typically how that happens. I think that idea of the shared, like a complete hierarchy within a customer is something that we want to do and we're kind of building for, but it doesn't work right now.
Nah, just tell everybody they got to shove
something
them.
we see often.
It's a very edge case from a service delivery perspective. And, given that we are going after a mass market plan, whether that's business or consumer, it's still the way that most plans are being sold today. And I don't see that changing dramatically anytime soon. So it's a great question. And the generalized question, Tommy, of like supporting more levels of hierarchy of shaping, that is absolutely on our roadmap. So theoretically, nothing's impossible.
Okay. And like, what about, and usually when I'm selling something like a like transport across my network, that would just be like a VLAN that would just run around whatever bandwidth shaping, and I just make certain that is always available. But is there any? Would that be something that you guys could also integrate or would look into, or have an option for?
Yeah, so today, some customers would just either give that traffic a really big plan, like just basically effectively make it unlimited, so it always shoots through without any shaping, or they just tell our box to ignore VLAN 10 and it just shoots through. Both of those are possible. We don't right now have a way of saying, well, I want this VLAN to get first crack downstream. But again, that's not generally the problem anyway, because where that bottleneck is going to be, if they don't have a dedicated path, it's going to be in the AP. So us
Right.
doing it wouldn't help anyway.
Mhm.
And if you're not aggregating that traffic through the bridge, which Preseem manages, then a VPLS tunnel, for instance, would be a point-to-point pseudo wire.
Yes.
It's going to go from A to B via OSPF costs or whatever you're using to push that traffic across your network. Preseem won't see that traffic.
Very likely it doesn't hit the edge. And so what we do,
Correct.
what we recommend in cases where you have, say, let's say secondary queuing mechanisms, whether that's PPPoE enforcement or a traditional BRAS, to still have Preseem be the bottleneck when you're actually talking about traffic that's exiting and entering your network. Kind of core adjacent that we're talking about here is you set those shapers to be. Well, one way we do it is we can give a scaling factor to Preseem, whether that's positive or negative. Generally, you want your secondary shapers, call them your backup shapers, if you will, to be slightly bigger so that they don't get hit under normal circumstances. And because they're usually, an inferior algorithm. So you could still have a system which would, say, limit at the AP, that layer 2 traffic, and then something separate on whatever their layer 3 plan is coming up, and Preseem wouldn't interfere with it. So there's a number of different ways to still allow other types of engineering in your network without harming that quality of experience.
And if your backhaul transport layer is MPLS, you're obviously unwrapping that layer when it passes through the bridge and passing it through then to your BNG and then out to the world.
Correct.
That's the question.
So
Is
that's
this
definitely
only
not
IP
gonna affect
v4 and v6? Does it know any other transport? Does it know MPLS? Does it know
So we
VXLAN?
can skip a few. Yeah, so not VXLAN. Well, actually, I should say not VXLAN.
Probably.
We've never tried. So what that really comes down to is the NIC support, because, and this is part of why they specialize in the NICs. So a lot of, I'll call them lower cost NICs, can't do anything with any encapsulations. Like if they see anything besides just IP and IPv6, for example, maybe not even that, they just stick it on one queue to one CPU. And you're done, right? So the higher end NICs will distribute it across all the queues depending on what encapsulations they support. Intel 710 will do one layer of VLANs, it'll do one layer of MPLS, and a bunch of other things. So those will work. But if you've got like a bunch of really deep MPLS stack, or you've got even VPLS, that's a real challenge, because the VPLS thing, it's not, you can't just look at the headers and know that it's VPLS. There's context there. So again, we're typically deployed outside of that, not actually seeing the VPLS traffic.
That one was kind of
And
off the cuff. That was interesting.
John, what does it matter? You're still running a token ring network.
How did you know? I've got a Mal sitting here.
Yeah, deterministic performance. Who can complain?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I was going to ask something about markets. From the very beginning of this, you started talking about that, almost everything you've done is with WISPs. And you've kind of answered this along the way, but is this, the questions I have is that the market you chased? Is that the market that found you? I mean, what other markets need you, and where else are you trying to push in?
So our kind of stated mission is to basically help all local and regional providers be successful. And the way to do that, we think, is help them deliver a better experience. The WISPs, I think, there's awesome companies in a lot of ways, right? So lots of really interesting people. The WISP shows are awesome, but they also have the most variable networks. So if you're going to introduce a quality of experience problem, where's the problem? It's in WISPs. And when we're just starting with like the 3 of us or 4 of us that started originally, you can't. There's a lot of small WISPs that aligns well, right? So it was a really obvious place to start for us, like some smaller companies that we could work with,
Right.
and they have very big quality problems. Over time, we're starting to see obviously bigger WISPs, and those bigger WISPs also have other access technologies that they're using for us as well. But we don't have, that kind of 3-legged stool I mentioned of the subscriber experience that works in any access network. The traffic management works in any access network. That middle layer that's kind of that we focused a lot on, of that deep understanding of the access network, we have that layer, I think, really, really strong in fixed wireless. We do not yet have that layer strong in other access technologies. And we're working on that, or we'll be working on that.
And you, as I said, Dan, Dan had experience running a WISP right out of high school. Dave Tott, who wrote FQ Codel, the open source algorithm that we use in our shaping, he wrote that algorithm because of his problems running a WISP in South America. So, he's of us, right? Or I should say our networks are solving real world problems. Often, as I say in the edge where, maybe it isn't cost effective for the biggest guys to come in, or, where they're not nimble enough to move to new technologies. And, certainly from my perspective as a rural operator for many years, was that, if it weren't for WISP technologies, we wouldn't have had internet. And as it turned out, I was able to make, the best internet for miles around, right? If you do it right.
It comes down to the problem solver hat.
It's a problem solver hat. And there's another aspect of it too, when we talk about this network effect of successful networks growing, being acquiring other networks. What is the edge today becomes the core for the next edge. And so, from a growth perspective, it's a really good place to start. And as Dan said, we solve the problems that are closest to our hearts first. And, that's been a strategy that's worked well.
Yeah. And there's just so much fun personality in the WISP space too. It's a lot of fun, right? Like previous to this, I worked in a company where we built products for the giant, Comcast, Telefonica and stuff. And it's so much more fun working with smaller providers. Like it's a much happier place to be.
I think it's probably also you can see real impactful change in people's lives, and I say lives because when you work with a business owner who a lot of the time is the guy who's climbing the tower, he's the guy sticking the dish on a roof, he's the guy who's sitting there at 2 o'clock in the morning going,
who's not taking phone calls anymore.
Why isn't this working? And he's the guy whose wife and kids is missing out on time. You're giving that time back, and that's something you can't buy, right? Time is not an infinite resource, and there is only 24 hours in a day. We all get the same 24 hours. If you can give someone that time back, you really do make an impact in that person's business. And I think that in a WISP space that's where we get seen. We get seen as the problem solvers. Certainly here, like Australia, it's huge. We've got such a vast land space, and we find that we get the phone calls when the other guys can't deliver anything. When the big carriers go, hands up, nah, sorry guys, we're out. We're tapping out. Build cost is too expensive. We're not going to trench. We're not going to drill. We're not going to bore. We're not going to do anything. That's when we get the phone calls. And I think from a problem solver hat, that's where you guys come in. You've come in with that not only industry experience, you've got the business experience behind you as well, and you understand real problems. And when you fix that problem, that downstream effect to people is what makes the difference.
Yeah, I think it's closer. It's like, you work for the big companies, you're so far removed from that you never feel it. Like
that's really good to see.
Yeah, well, and I feel like with a lot of the idea, like in the United States, a lot of guys have been really frustrated with the federal government's pushing of particular bandwidth speeds for service delivery.
Rather than saying, here's the quality that an operator needs to be providing.
Yeah, which I totally get it. There's been plenty of experiences, and I'm sure John would love to go off on how awful government spending has been on telecom services. But like really, that the selling point is like, does Netflix work? Am I able to get my, is the teacher able to teach a class? Is the business able to integrate with whatever online services they need to interact with? And honestly, like the average American household still is around 5 megabits per second at peak time. So like and that's for my network. I've done fiber, I've done wireless, I've done DSL, I haven't done coax, but like it's consistent. Like once you get a large number of customers, they don't on average use all that much. So like throwing bandwidth at the problem really doesn't solve it, especially when like there's things that can totally blow up the service and blow up the experience. Like being able to deliver that, like, hey, the web page loads and it loads quick. And like and that's what kind of Dave is been pushing a lot is not only like end or high bandwidth utilization scenarios are you seeing benefits, you're also going to see benefits in low utilization scenarios as well when there's just like little spikes or
Yeah, microbursts are a real thing.
Yeah.
Like, even within a plan rate.
Dave was tweeting at us today, actually, Tommy, about he said, wouldn't it be great if all the Preseem operators could get their subscribers to post the new Ookla speed test app now gives you detailed latency under load metrics. He says, wouldn't it be great if everybody could post those results because you guys are doing amazing work. And he's right. Like I just quickly did a test on my phone, AT&T cellular versus my fixed wireless connection here at home that I'm talking to you on. And we're talking a 20 to 30x improvement in latency for the exact same bandwidth, right? And in my case, I don't actually have Preseem at home. I am using FQ Codel, so it's not as good as what Preseem would be doing, but it's better than nothing. And the fact that
Quality over quantity, though. It's
exactly
always comes down to.
yeah.
Well,
so I've always said.
Yeah, and you guys, you keep mentioning that you guys have tuned FQ Codel. Like I've set it up for multiple different networks. It is not. It takes time to tune it and set it up so that it works. It's not just a flip the switch. Even Cake, Mikrotik is running into issues. Like you guys are bringing in a drop-in system that drop it in, follow the directions. Where are there issues, and you guys really do work with the guys.
And hopefully, us spending. Part of the goal is we spend the time to figure these things out so that you don't have to, and hopefully we've tuned the right knobs there to get the best experience, so you don't need to go play with them and figure that out. Like that's hopefully part of the value we bring to play.
Yeah, and you guys interact with the provider. Like you don't just sell a box and say, okay, pay us per subscriber. Here we go. You interact with them as they're implementing your equipment into the network. I don't just talk to a sales guy. I talk to a sales engineer and such, and make certain that where everything is going. And I have to actively lie to you to say that no, there isn't. There's backup. We can go around. Like, you guys actually do that. So that's
I'll go
that's
open
really
the
cool
CRM and put a note in that you were. Yes. Yeah. We try to be involved in the process. It's not just buy something and then go away. Like you go into the app, there's a support guy in the corner, you click on it and you're going to get one of our support team to talk to. So.
Yeah, and really, really fast. And everything just kind of, it flows really good. I think we had like one time, it's like, what's going on? And then we failed over by moving the cable over. That was our physical failover solution. And then you guys fixed it. So if you were wanting guys to check you guys out, one thing I just was gonna note is we've been talking about this product Preseem, but the company isn't Preseem. It's Atelo.
Yeah, Atelo Network. So the history there is when we started, we weren't sure what we were going to do, so we picked a company name, and then eventually we decided, well, we had a previous product that didn't work out so well, and that had a different name as well. And then when it came time to try something new, we ended up picking Preseem, which the history of that is I was in LaGuardia for some reason making up domain names, and I registered that like a decade ago, like just in one of a bunch. And then we were sitting around saying, well, what are we going to call this thing? When we started Preseem, I'm like, well, I have this domain that I registered ages ago, and it meets the only real requirements is you can get .com and you can say it on the phone and you can spell it. Okay. So that's where Preseem came from.
Kodak of product names.
Wow. That's interesting. I've never heard that story. That's a really cool.
Well, I finally figured out what Atterlow meant because it's in Waterloo, just with the W on the beginning and the O at the end lopped off.
Yeah, that's how creative we were when we started. Yeah.
You are obviously a bunch of engineers.
Yes.
Dan, that's probably the most honest version of domain squatting I've ever heard of.
Yeah.
But I like that he was thinking, you once a product manager, always a product manager, right? You're thinking ahead to say, okay, well, if I eventually come up with some new products, we're going to need names for them.
Yeah, and you got
it. A seven character pronounceable domain name goes for a lot of money these days. So
yeah, and it really matters. Like if you have a name where you like if you can't say it in conversation and someone go Google it, you've already lost half the battle. I really, yeah. So yeah, I kind of got lucky, I think.
So if somebody was wanting to kind of get an idea and start interacting with your team, where would they kind of need to go?
Yeah, just go to Preseem.com. There's on the kind of the, we call it the marketing site, like the main site. You click there, you'll get, a little chat box as well. And that kind of goes into the team that'll kind of answer some initial questions, put you in touch with someone that can do a demo. That's probably the quickest and fastest way. Of course, email and all that stuff too.
Yep. I'm Jeremy at Preseem.com, and Dan's Dan at Preseem.com. Yeah. There is a direct book a demo link if you don't even want to talk to somebody, but you just want to give us your deets. We'll have somebody follow up with you. That's just preseem.com/book-a-demo. I think there's a big book a demo button right in the upper right hand corner.
I'm pretty certain there is. And I will have that link at the bottom of the in the show notes and at the bottom of the YouTube video. So if anybody wants to take a look at that, definitely.
Yeah, and if you are interested in exploring this and don't want to talk to anybody, and that's okay too, because sometimes you just don't want to talk to anybody right away. If you go to our YouTube channel, there's a bunch of recorded webinars. Some of them are me and Jeremy, some of them are other people, and you can see some screenshots about like the scores and things that we're talking about without having to actually talk to us first. So.
And it's less than 4 months away. I want to say 3.5 months away. We will be in Vegas at WISPapalooza, the biggest WISP show of the year. We're going to have one of the biggest booths there, and that's always a great place. We usually have a pretty good team, both technical and less technical people. Both Dan and I will be there. That's always a good chance to tell us, if you're as it's increasingly more likely, if you're already a Preseem customer, you can come and either heap your praise, or if you have any complaints, those can go directly to Dan. And we find it so helpful to interact with the operators, the people who are using Preseem every day. The smarter ones are using it every day, and it really, your input as ISPs, operators, no matter what your role is at the company, it really does. It does steer the product, which we believe makes the world a better place. So we absolutely couldn't do it without our customers.
Well, awesome, wonderful. Well, we're at more than an hour and a half almost here, so I know. Yeah, I've had lots of fun. I guess we should probably be calling it though, because I need to go make myself some dinner because I skipped lunch today. Greg, if people were wanting to reach out to you and bug you about stuff, how are they going to get a hold of you?
You'll find me on LinkedIn. Just search my name on LinkedIn. If you're going to connect with me, make sure you just pop in Brothers Wisp or TBW in the connect request so that I know where the hell you're from, because I get an awful lot of requests. Otherwise, you'll find me on the Brothers Wisp Slack, and very active in there. Come and say good day. And if you want a funny GIF, I will send you funny GIFs, because that seems to be my thing in there.
I will. Yeah, I'll look for the Slack. Yeah, I've been a subscriber for a long time, and it's not. I really should have been one earlier. Is my only regret upon joining the Brothers Wisp Slack and being a Patreon supporter. It's absolutely worth doing.
Yeah,
Do it.
There are far smarter people than all of us, and I think if you jump in there, you'll start to realize that there is some amazing brain power and brains trust and phone a friend and all that sort of stuff, and the community in there is awesome. If you've got a problem, you post in there. There's generally someone watching, and even if they are on the other side of the world, I've been on the phone to guys in the US, in Canada. Can be nighttime their time, daytime my time, and sometimes that fresh set of eyes and a phone a friend is what you need, and that's what the community provides.
Yeah, definitely. John, what about you? How are people supposed to reach out to you?
Well, as everyone's saying, the Brothers Wisp Slack is a good place to find me.
They can send him a telex.
Hey, I like email. John@osmond.net always works. If you're really bored, you can go find my somewhat unused blog at miscreantsinAction.com, and there's some rantings and ravings on there that might give you an idea of what the personality behind the man, the myth, the legend, as Tommy says.
He does have some really fun experiences, and if you're ever around Albuquerque, bug him, because he knows where all the great bars are, and all the cool data centers too, and all the stories behind the data centers, which is
And the bars
more
in the
nice.
data centers.
Hey, those are the
We can
best
talk
ones.
about those.
There's nothing like drinking in the hot row.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. This has been really cool. I hope you guys all go take a look out at our the Preseem. Check them out. Tell them that we sent you, and so that they know that their shout outs are going to good places. And I guess we'll be catching you guys later. So thank you very much.
Cause fun is the mission. I'm telling you, you don't know what you are missing. Ideas and some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.